All right. Welcome, everyone.
Hi. Hey, Andrea.
Let's get started. We're going to be talking about America's voting system, which really is the very foundation of our democracy.
As a first-generation American, I take the right to vote very seriously.
My relatives, not very far back, were denied the right to vote in this country, so I have very strong feelings about protecting those rights.
And you're not alone. Despite the pandemic, the U.S. had record voter turnout in the 2020 general election. Even so, almost a third of eligible Americans didn't vote, and only about a quarter of the population shows up for local elections. That's much lower turnout than most other developed countries.
Which is why we should make it easier to vote, not harder.
But some restrictions are there to make sure elections can be trusted.
I'm sure some people don't show up because they don't think their votes will matter.
Those are good points. A lot of people are concerned about the election system in the United States, but don't necessarily agree on what the main problems are or how to fix them. So today, we are going to deliberate on 3 options. These aren't the only options, but they're a starting point. Option 1 would make voting easier. Option 2 would focus on making voting more secure. And option 3 says we should offer more and better choices. Let's start with option 1. Would easing restrictions improve elections and voter turnout?
Historically, restrictions on voting and voter registration were designed to favor certain people over others, and still are.
And since the Constitution puts states in charge of their own elections, rules are very inconsistent from one state to the next.
Would more people vote if registration were simpler and more consistent?
Voter registration should just be automatic on the day you turn 18.
I see voting more as a privilege of citizenship. People should be willing to put in the effort.
What else would make voting more accessible to everyone?
I work extended schedules, and sometimes I can't take off work to go and vote. Now, I've never understood why Election Day isn't a national holiday.
A lot of working people probably still couldn't get the day off. Making early voting available in the weeks leading up to an election would give people more options.
Absolutely. A person shouldn't have to choose between voting or losing pay. And there should be more polling places so no one has to stand in line for 6 hours.
I live in a rural area, and people have to drive a long way to get to the courthouse for early voting. I don't know how our county could pay for more polls and longer hours.
That would be a drawback. Mail-in ballots seem like the answer to a lot of these problems.
I just don't know if we can trust mail-in ballots.
I'm not sure either, but it made it easier during the pandemic.
I think 2020 proved that mail-in voting is safe. The recounts didn't turn up any fraud in mail-in ballots.
I just think in-person voting with a valid photo ID is the best way to protect against voter fraud.
The problem is, a lot of older people and people in cities don't drive. And getting an official state photo ID when you're poor has its own set of problems. So requiring a driver's license disadvantages populations that already have low voter turnout.
With all different kinds of voting machines and ways to vote, it seems like there would be a lot of places where an interference could take place. Right? Just because it might not have happened doesn't mean it can't or won't.
Plus, people should have to give a legitimate reason why they need to vote absentee.
I don't think people should have to justify why they prefer to vote absentee. I do think more needs to be done to make sure elections are safe from interference by foreign governments and also by other groups that want to influence an election.
These are the kinds of doubts that lead to more political drama and division in our country.
Some people see their vote as meaningless. I think there are other changes we need to look at.
Could you explain a little further?
Have you ever looked at voting districts? Both sides draw them so that their candidates will win. We need to have independent commissions draw those districts fairly and get rid of gerrymandering.
Some states are already doing that, but I would want some oversight of those commissions, or we'd be back where we started.
If we're talking big changes, we should look at the Electoral College. It's not common, but a presidential candidate can win the popular vote, but lose the election and the presidency.
Rather than voters electing a president directly, our system gives each state a number of electors based on its population. Would Americans see the voting system as more legitimate if we eliminated the Electoral College in favor of a national popular vote?
It would require changing the Constitution.
That's getting into shaky ground. But the Electoral College also means that we are sort of stuck with the two-party system. I'd like independent candidates to actually have a chance of winning.
Well, to do that, we'd also have to change the way we finance elections, which wouldn't be a bad thing in my view. I mean, it would bring in more candidates to choose from.
It would be harder to weed out unqualified candidates, though. There are a lot of trade-offs to consider.
Getting back to the Electoral College, a popular vote would force candidates to campaign in all states, not just the swing states,
Thank you all for participating and for listening thoughtfully to views you might not agree with.
We have different ideas for solutions, but it's clear that many Americans are worried about the integrity of our elections.
I think one thing we can agree on is that any options come with trade-offs.
And risks we might not even anticipate.
So let's keep talking.